I didn't know my life was about to collapse the morning I stood at a demolition site, holding a cup of cheap coffee, believing, foolishly, that I was still in control of something. Last winter, I was 48 years old and completely broke. Not tight on money broke. Not temporary setback broke. I mean the kind of broke where you sleep in your brother's basement, eat 2 packets of ramen a day, and avoid mirrors because you don't want to look at what failure has turned you into. But 6 months before that, I owned everything I thought mattered. I had built Hartley Demolition Services from nothing over 20 years. 14 crews across 3 states, government contracts, a reputation I bled for. I lived in a suburban house with a pool. I had a husband, Jonathan, correction made later in my life when I learned how easily names disappear, who loved hosting dinner parties, smiling for guests, pretending stability was permanent. And my son, Tyler, was finishing his 2nd year at State College. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, earned, mine. The morning everything exploded started like any other workday. I was standing at the Riverside Mall demolition site, blueprints tucked under my arm, pride swelling in my chest. A $20 million project, the biggest contract my company had ever landed. I remember thinking, this proves I was right to believe in myself. The demolition itself was flawless. Charges fired exactly on schedule. The building folded inward like it was bowing to us. Textbook perfection. And then I smelled gas. Sharp, metallic, wrong. I screamed for my crew to back away. My heart slammed against my ribs as sirens flooded the air, and 6 city blocks were evacuated. By that evening, aerial footage of my negligence led the news. My company logo was everywhere, on hard hats, trucks, headlines. Within weeks, lawsuits came crashing down. Within months, my business dissolved. My home was foreclosed. My marriage lasted exactly 2 weeks after the notice arrived. Jonathan stood in our doorway, suitcases packed, eyes cold. I didn't marry a loser, he said. And just like that, the life I built with my own hands vanished. What I didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that my lowest point would lead me somewhere impossible. Somewhere that would expose a secret buried for decades. Something hidden in my own blood. Something worth millions. Before the headlines, before the lawsuits, before I became a woman sleeping beneath someone else's floorboards, I was just steady. I'm Jessica Hartley, 48, and for most of my adult life, I believed stability was something you built the way you built a wall. One brick at a time, quietly, relentlessly, without drama. I wasn't the kind of woman who chased attention. I wasn't reckless. I didn't gamble. I didn't drink my paycheck away or make impulsive decisions just to feel alive. I worked, I planned, I showed up. That's how Hartley Demolition Services was born. Not out of luck, but out of sweat and stubbornness. I started at 28 with a used pickup truck that rattled when it idled, a tool belt that had belonged to my uncle, and a job hauling debris for a crew that didn't take women seriously. I learned to keep my voice calm even when men tried to talk over me. I learned to stare back when they tested me. I learned to do the math faster than anyone else in the room. Permits, costs, labor hours, safety margins. And when I finally opened my own company, I didn't call it Hartley because I wanted my name on something. I called it that because I wanted my son to grow up knowing his mother built something real. Tyler was the anchor of my life. He was the reason I didn't fall apart when jobs were late, when clients pushed deadlines, when equipment broke down at the worst possible time. I could be exhausted, hands scraped, back aching, and still come home and help him with homework, still make spaghetti, still listen to him talk about school like his little world was the most important thing on earth. Then there was Jonathan. People like to imagine marriages collapse because of one explosive betrayal, cheating, screaming, a dramatic confession. That wasn't my story. Jonathan didn't destroy me with one act. He did it with a slow shift in the way he looked at me, when my success stopped benefiting him. I met him when I was 31. I was at a friend's backyard barbecue, still wearing work boots because I'd come straight from a site inspection. My hair smelled faintly like dust and concrete, and I felt self-conscious standing near women in sundresses who looked like they'd stepped out of catalogs. Jonathan walked up with a drink in his hand and said, smiling like he'd known me forever, "You don't look like you belong at a barbecue." I narrowed my eyes. "And you do?" He laughed. "I look like I don't belong anywhere. That's my talent." He was charming, not flashy, but smooth in a way that made you feel chosen. He worked in sales, nothing physical, nothing dirty, clean shirts, polished shoes, quick compliments. The kind of man who knew how to make strangers like him in under a minute. He told me he admired that I was driven, that I was different, that I didn't need saving. And for a while, I believed him. We dated for 2 years before we married. When he proposed, he did it at home. No audience, no cameras, just the two of us in the kitchen after Tyler had fallen asleep. He pulled a ring out of a small box and said, "I want to build a life with you, the real kind, the kind that lasts." I said yes, because I thought he meant it. At first, he did. He helped with Tyler when my schedule was brutal. He sat in bleachers at school events. He carried groceries. He kissed my cheek when I came home covered in dust. He told people proudly, "My wife owns a demolition company," like it made him look impressive by association. But slowly, the edges changed. When I landed bigger contracts, Jonathan's pride shifted into expectation. Like my success was a faucet he assumed would always run. He began to host more. He liked the image of us, suburban house, pool, dinner parties, the power couple vibe. The parties were his stage. He'd invite neighbors, business acquaintances, sometimes even men I'd met in bidding meetings. He'd light the patio lanterns, set out wine he barely understood, and smile like he'd built the whole life himself. I'd be inside, changing out of work clothes, washing dust from my wrists, trying to pull myself together fast enough to be presentable. "Smile," he'd whisper sometimes, low enough that no one else could hear. "You look tense." And I'd smile because I thought that was what marriage was, adjusting yourself so the other person could feel comfortable. His family was worse. Jonathan's sister Patricia didn't like me from day one. She had that polished, expensive look, hair always perfect, nails always done, the kind of confidence that comes from never having to struggle publicly. The first time I met her, she scanned me like a price tag. "So you're the construction wife," she said, voice light, eyes sharp. "Demolition," I corrected. She smiled like I'd said something cute. "Same thing, isn't it?" Jonathan's mother wasn't openly cruel, but she carried her judgment like perfume, always present, never acknowledged. She'd make little comments about my schedule, my hands, my tiredness. "Jessica, don't you ever think of doing something safer?" she once asked at dinner, stirring her soup slowly. "For Tyler's sake." I forced a laugh. "I run a business. It's safe." She tilted her head. "Men get hurt in that kind of work." The words landed like a needle. Men. As if I was borrowing a life I didn't naturally deserve. Jonathan didn't defend me. He'd just squeeze my knee under the table, like, "Don't make it a thing." Over time, I learned the unspoken rule. In their world, I was allowed to be impressive as long as I stayed grateful, as long as I didn't make them feel small. And then, when the company finally hit its peak, 14 crews, multiple states, government contracts, Jonathan started talking more about his lifestyle than our sacrifices. He didn't see the nights I spent awake checking budgets, or the years I went without vacations so I could buy equipment outright instead of taking loans. He saw the pool, the parties, the way people looked at him when he said, "My wife owns the company." I didn't notice how much I was carrying, because I was used to carrying things. And that's the part that still hurts the most. I wasn't blind. There were signs, little ones, the kind you dismiss when you're tired and trying to protect the life you love. Jonathan became impatient when I talked about stress. He rolled his eyes if I mentioned safety protocols, like it bored him. He stopped asking about my day, but started asking about money. New furniture, trips, upgrades. Once, after I'd come home late from a site, exhausted, he said casually, "You work too much. Sometimes I feel like I'm married to the company." I remember taking off my boots, rubbing my sore ankle, and saying, "You're married to the life the company gives you." He stared at me for a second. Then he smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Careful," he said softly. That sounded bitter. I swallowed the moment down. I didn't want conflict. I wanted peace. I thought I didn't understand that silence is exactly where people like Jonathan hide their true selves, until the moment you become inconvenient. And 6 months later, when my life cracked open at a demolition site, he didn't hesitate. He didn't say, "We'll fix this." He looked at my failure like it was contagious, like it made me less of a woman and less of a wife. Looking back now, the signs didn't arrive loudly. They crept in quietly, wrapped in normal days and reasonable explanations, the kind that slip past you when you're already tired. After the Riverside Mall demolition, I told myself the stress I felt was temporary. One bad project didn't erase 20 years of clean work. One oversight, someone else's oversight, didn't define me. I still had crews to manage, bids to prepare, lawyers to meet. I still woke up early, pulled my hair into a tight knot, and told myself to keep moving. But the atmosphere around me had changed. At work, conversations went just a beat longer before people answered. Danny, my project manager of 8 years, avoided my eyes more than usual. He'd always been confident, borderline cocky, the kind of man who liked waving permits around like trophies. Now, he spoke faster, explained more, as if he needed to justify himself. "City signed off on everything," he repeated more than once, tapping the folder. "Utilities were cleared. We did what we were supposed to." I nodded, but something in my stomach stayed tight. At home, Jonathan became distant in a way that felt strategic. He still smiled in front of other people, still played the supportive husband when neighbors asked about the project. But when it was just the two of us, his patience thinned. One night, a week after the evacuation, I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, insurance policies, contracts, legal notices, trying to make sense of language designed to confuse people on purpose. Jonathan opened the fridge, sighed loudly, and said, "So, how bad is it?" I looked up. "I don't know yet." He closed the fridge without taking anything out. "That's not very reassuring." "I'm still getting information," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The city gave us outdated blueprints. There's a chance liability—" "Jessica," he interrupted, leaning against the counter. "I don't need the technical version. I need to know if this is going to affect us." U.S. I stared at him. "Of course it affects us. It's my company." He shrugged. "I just mean the house, our lifestyle, Tyler's tuition." The way he said it, like a checklist, made my chest ache. "I've handled worse," I said quietly. "I always do." He nodded, but his eyes drifted away, like he'd already moved on to another calculation. That was the first time I felt it clearly, the shift from partner to observer, from we to you. His family sensed it too. Or maybe they'd been waiting for it. Patricia started calling more often, her concern wrapped in thinly veiled judgment. "Jonathan's been under a lot of stress," she said one afternoon when I answered the phone while reviewing invoices. "You know how men are. They need stability." "I'm aware," I said dryly. "Well," she continued, voice smooth, "maybe it's time you reassessed things. Your line of work is risky. Jonathan deserves some security." I bit back a sharp response. "Jonathan has security. I've provided it for years." A pause. "That's not really how a marriage should feel," she replied. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my desk, hands resting on contracts worth millions, and wondered when my success had started being framed as a threat. Even Tyler noticed. He called one night from his dorm, his voice careful. "Mom, Dad seems kind of tense when I talk to him." I forced a smile he couldn't see. "Your father worries too much, but he keeps asking if I have backup plans, like if something happens." Something already had happened. I just hadn't let it touch Tyler yet. At work, the legal pressure intensified. The city's lawsuit landed like a hammer, $10 million in damages. The gas company followed with $5 million. Then came the smaller claims, businesses demanding compensation for lost revenue, contractors distancing themselves, calls that went unanswered. When the insurance lawyers arrived, they weren't hostile. They were worse, polite. They sat in my conference room, suits crisp, expressions neutral, flipping through paperwork like my life was a case study. The policy requires independent verification of underground utilities, the lead attorney said calmly, sliding documents toward me. The city verified, I said. They signed off. He nodded, already expecting that. Which is why subsection 12 exists. I remember staring at the page, my signature at the bottom, my own handwriting betraying me. Jonathan didn't come to that meeting. He said he had work obligations. That night, when I told him coverage was being denied, he went quiet. How much? He finally asked. Enough to destroy the company, I said honestly. He exhaled slowly, like someone absorbing bad news they'd hoped wouldn't come true. Then he said something I still replay in my head. I always thought you were careful. It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was disappointment. From that point on, he stopped pretending. He started staying out later, taking calls in other rooms, avoiding conversations about the future. And when foreclosure notices arrived, thick envelopes, official and unforgiving, he didn't ask how I was holding up. He asked, "What are we going to tell people?" That's when I knew. Not that my marriage was in trouble, but that Jonathan had already decided which side of the collapse he wanted to be on. And I was standing alone on the wrong one. The moment my life truly broke didn't come with sirens or headlines. It came quietly, on a morning that looked painfully normal. I woke up early, as I always did, before Jonathan, before the house stirred. The foreclosure notice had arrived 2 days earlier, thick and final, its language cold and indifferent to effort or history. I'd spent the night before sitting at the kitchen table, rereading it until the words blurred, trying to figure out which part of my life I could still save. I told myself we'd get through it. That's what married people did. They stayed. They absorbed the impact together. I was still holding on to that belief when I heard the sound of zippers. Not rushing, not frantic, calm, deliberate. I walked down the hallway and saw him standing in the bedroom, fully dressed, suit pressed, shoes polished, 2 suitcases by the door, already packed. For a second, my brain refused to connect the image to reality. "Where are you going?" I asked. Jonathan didn't look at me right away. He adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, eyes focused on his reflection like this was just another workday. "I'm going to stay with Patricia for a while," he said. "I need space." The words hit, but they didn't land yet. "Space?" I repeated. "Jonathan, this isn't the time for—" He turned then, and the expression on his face stopped me mid-sentence. I had never seen him look at me like that. Not angry, not sad, disgusted, like I was something he'd stepped in by accident and couldn't wait to scrape off his shoe. "I didn't marry a loser, Jessica," he said flatly. The room tilted. "I built this life," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. "I built everything you're standing in, and now it's gone," he replied. "You're 48 years old and about to be homeless. You can't even afford to take me to dinner anymore." I stared at him, searching his face for a trace of the man I'd married, the man who'd said he wanted a life that lasted. "Married people don't leave when things get hard," I said quietly. "They stay. They fix it." He laughed once, short, sharp. "This isn't hard," he said. "This is failure." Then he said the words that still wake me up at night. "You know what you are now? You're just another broke, middle-aged woman who couldn't hack it." Something in my chest cracked open. "We've been married 22 years, I said. "That has to mean something." Jonathan walked over to the dresser and picked up his jewelry box, the one I'd bought him for our 15th anniversary after months of saving, tucking away cash like a secret promise. He opened it, checked its contents, then closed it with a snap. "And for 21 of those years," he said calmly, "you were successful." He walked toward the door, then paused. "My lawyer will send the papers," he added. "Don't contest it. Just let me go with whatever dignity you have left." The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I sank onto the edge of the bed and sat there in silence, surrounded by boxes I couldn't afford to store and a house I no longer owned. That was the moment it became clear. I wasn't just losing my business. I was losing my marriage, my home, my standing, everything I thought defined me. And the worst part, Jonathan didn't leave because I failed. He left because my failure stopped benefiting him. I stayed there for hours before calling the only person I had left who didn't see me as a liability. My brother, Nathan. "Come stay with me," he said immediately. No hesitation. "The basement isn't much, but it's warm. And you're my sister." I packed what I could fit into my car and drove away from the life I'd built, watching it shrink in the rearview mirror. I had no idea that hitting rock bottom was only the beginning. Nathan had tried to make it welcoming. He unfolded the pull-out couch, laid out clean sheets, even plugged in a small space heater near the wall. The light was dim, filtered through a narrow window that showed a strip of sky and the underside of the deck above me. It wasn't terrible. It was just humbling in a way that pressed on my chest every time I breathed. That first night, I lay there fully dressed, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the sounds of my brother's normal life happening above me. Footsteps, dishes, laughter from his kids drifting down like something I wasn't allowed to touch anymore. I didn't cry right away. Shock does that. It freezes you in place, keeps your emotions locked behind glass. My body felt hollow, like everything important had been scooped out and replaced with air. I kept replaying Jonathan's words, not angrily, but clinically, like evidence. "I didn't marry a loser. You're about to be homeless. Let me go with whatever dignity you have left." I wondered when dignity had become something other people decided you were allowed to keep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of an alarm upstairs, Nathan getting ready for work, his wife Carol moving through the kitchen, their routine steady and intact. I waited until the house emptied before I came upstairs, moving quietly like a guest who didn't want to overstay. Carol had left a plate on the counter. Toast, eggs, coffee in a mug I didn't recognize. "For you," a note read. No judgment, no pity. I swallowed the lump in my throat and ate standing at the sink, forcing myself not to rush, like the food might disappear if I didn't guard it. The phone calls started that week. Lawyers, creditors, former clients who spoke carefully, politely, as if my collapse were contagious. My business accounts froze. Equipment was scheduled for auction. Trucks I'd bought with years of profit would be sold for a fraction of their worth. Each call chipped away at something inside me. Jonathan didn't call. Not once. But Patricia did. She left a voicemail, her tone falsely gentle. "Jonathan just needs time, Jessica. He's under a lot of stress. This separation is probably for the best." Separation. As if 22 years could be paused like a subscription. I deleted the message without responding. Tyler called that night. He tried to sound normal, asked about work, about the house. I could hear the strain in his voice, the careful way he avoided asking what he already suspected. "Mom, are you okay?" he finally asked. "I'm fine," I said automatically. The lie tasted bitter. "I heard Dad talking to Aunt Patricia," he admitted. "She said you're staying with Uncle Nathan." My stomach twisted. "Your father doesn't know everything about my situation," I said carefully. "And neither does Patricia." There was a pause, then softly, "I can take a semester off. There's a construction company here that's hiring." "No," I said, sharper than I intended. "Absolutely not." "Mom, you are 3 semesters from graduating," I continued, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles hurt. "You stay in school. You focus. I'll handle this." Silence on the other end. "I can send you some of my work study money," he said quietly. "It's not much, but—" "Tyler," I interrupted, forcing my voice to steady. "I'm your mother. I take care of you, not the other way around." Another pause. Longer this time. "Okay," he said. "I promise." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch and stared at the floor until my vision blurred. The shame hit then, not because I was broke, but because my son had seen it, because Jonathan had turned my struggle into gossip. By January, I had $40 left. 40. I counted it over and over, like the number might change if I respected it enough. Gas, food, job applications, everything had to be calculated. Poverty didn't allow mistakes. The basement became my world. A card table for meals, 2 packets of ramen left. A window that reminded me there was still a life above ground, where people moved forward without thinking about how much it costs to breathe. I applied for jobs every day. Foreman positions, site manager roles, anything I was qualified for. Most didn't respond. A few interviews came back with polite rejections. You're overqualified. You'd leave as soon as something better came along. We're looking for someone younger. One interview finally stuck. A commercial project 90 miles away. 90 miles meant gas. Gas meant money I didn't really have. That night, lying on the couch, I stared at the ceiling again and did the math in my head. Slow and merciless. That was when I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was running out of options. And I hadn't even reached the worst part yet. Desperation has a rhythm. It wakes you before dawn, not with panic, but with calculation. Numbers lining up in your head before your eyes even open. Gas, food, time, pride. What can be spent? What must be swallowed? The morning after I secured the interview, Nathan left early for a job across town. I heard his truck pull away, tires crunching on gravel. Carol was upstairs getting the kids ready for school, her voice drifting down through the floorboards as she spoke to someone on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but when you're invisible, you hear everything. No, Mom, he really is trying, Carol said softly. She applies for jobs every day. A pause. I know, but who's going to hire a 48-year-old former owner for entry-level work? They'll assume she'll leave the second something better comes along. I closed my eyes. The words weren't cruel. They were practical. And somehow that hurt more. I waited until the front door closed behind them before I went upstairs. The house felt different when it was empty. Too quiet, too generous. I stood in the pantry, staring at shelves that weren't mine. Canned soup, pasta, cereal. Food bought for a family that wasn't me. I closed the door. The ramen in my bag was down to 2 packets. I boiled water, mixed one, and ate it standing at the sink, the steam fogging my glasses. I forced myself not to think about the steaks I used to grill on weekends, the restaurants Jonathan and I used to visit, the way money used to feel invisible. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, walking to the public library where I used free Wi-Fi to submit applications and check emails that never came. That's when I saw the sign. BioCore Plasma Center. New donors. $50 first visit. I stopped walking. $50. I stood across the street for 10 minutes, watching people come and go. A college girl counting cash, smiling with relief. A man in construction boots, shoulders slumped, heading inside without hesitation. People who looked like they'd reached the same conclusion I was standing in front of now. $50 meant gas for the interview. It meant maybe a real meal before I showed up, so I wouldn't look as desperate as I felt. It meant a few more days of pretending I could still climb out of the hole I was in. I hated how long I stood there. Hated that my pride argued with my hunger. Hated that the decision felt like surrender. But eventually, I crossed the street. The doors opened with a soft hiss, and the smell hit me immediately. Disinfectant and something heavier. Defeat, maybe. Or reality. I filled out the paperwork with hands that shook slightly. The questions felt invasive, stripping. Have you eaten today? No. When was your last full meal? I lied and wrote yesterday instead of 3 days ago. Are you currently employed? No. Is this donation for personal financial need? Yes. The waiting room was quiet in that way people get when they're pretending something is normal. A woman across from me read a romance novel like she'd chosen this as a casual errand. A young man slept with his arms crossed, exhaustion etched into his face. A nurse called my name. Jessica Hartley? I stood. Her name tag read Rebecca. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with kind eyes that made me feel every one of my 48 years. First time? She asked gently as she led me back. Yeah, I said. Never thought I'd be here. No shame in it, she replied easily. You're helping save lives. She prepped the chair, wrapped the cuff around my arm, tapped lightly to find a vein. My father used to donate, I said without thinking. He said it was what decent people did. She smiled. He wasn't wrong. The needle slid in smoothly. I turned my head and watched the dark red flow through the tube into the collection bag. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, it looked almost unreal, like something precious being siphoned away. Rebecca adjusted the machine, checking the flow. Good color, she murmured. Very healthy. Then she frowned. She leaned closer to the line, her expression sharpening. She pulled a small vial from the tubing and held it up to the light. That's strange, she said. My heart jumped. What's strange? I just need to run a quick test, she replied quickly. Standard procedure. She took the vial to a machine in the corner, placed a drop on a slide, and peered into a microscope. I watched her posture change. She straightened, looked again, adjusted something, looked a third time. Then she stepped back like she'd seen something impossible. Miss Hartley, she whispered, I need to get the medical director. Please don't move. Don't disconnect anything. My pulse thundered in my ears. Am I sick? I asked, the words coming out sharp despite my attempt to stay calm. Is something wrong? No, she said quickly. Nothing's wrong. She hesitated, eyes wide. Everything is about to be very right. And then she hurried out of the room, leaving me there, needle in my arm, machine humming steadily, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios I couldn't afford. Cancer, some rare disease. Another thing waiting to finish what losing everything had started. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant murmur of the waiting room, the TV droning on about markets and mortgage rates like some cruel joke. I had walked in for $50, and suddenly, something far bigger than money had found me. Time stretched in that chair. The machine kept its steady rhythm, pull, pause, pull, like it didn't care that my entire nervous system was spiraling. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the tiny cracks, forcing my breathing to stay even. Around me, other donors scrolled on their phones, oblivious. Someone laughed softly at something on the TV. Life went on. Mine felt suspended. Every fear I'd buried rose at once. Cancer, some genetic defect, another diagnosis I couldn't afford. I thought about Tyler finishing school without me, about Nathan and Carol quietly absorbing the burden of me longer than they should, about Jonathan, already rewriting our history so my collapse fit neatly into his version of events. I had walked in here for gas money. Now I was bargaining with the universe. Rebecca returned with a tall, thin man in a white coat, Dr. Harrison. He looked at the collection bag, then at a tablet, then back at my arm like he was trying to solve an equation that shouldn't exist. Miss Hartley, he said, pulling up a chair close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. We need to run a comprehensive panel immediately. I can't afford tests, I said quickly. I don't have insurance. No charge, he replied. This is extraordinary. That word didn't comfort me. He studied the screen again, eyes bright with a kind of excitement that felt wrong in a place where people sold pieces of themselves to make rent. Your blood type is Rh null, he said carefully. We call it golden blood. I blinked. Is that bad? Bad? He almost laughed, catching himself. Miss Hartley, fewer than 50 people on Earth are documented with this type. Your blood can be used for patients who otherwise have no compatible donors. You can save lives that no one else can. My mind struggled to keep up, so I'm rare. Incredibly. His phone buzzed. He answered immediately, speaking fast, eyes never leaving me. Yes, confirmed. She's here now. A pause. I understand the urgency. He hung up and looked at me again, something urgent and careful in his expression. Before he could explain, the door opened. She walked in like the room belonged to her. Tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, a designer bag carried with purpose, not decoration. Everything about her said control, money, power, consequence. Dr. Harrison straightened. Miss Moretti. She looked at me, and beneath her composed exterior, I saw something raw, desperation barely contained. Miss Hartley, she said, sitting across from me without asking. My name is Catherine Moretti. I represent the Laurent family of Monaco. Monaco. The word sounded absurd against the hum of the machine and the sting in my arm. Alexander Laurent is dying, she continued. He needs a transfusion within 12 hours. You're the only compatible donor we've found in North America. My mouth went dry. That's Europe. The family jet is waiting, she said calmly, and the Laurents are prepared to offer $2 million for your immediate cooperation. $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. This morning I'd counted $40 in my wallet. I'd eaten ramen standing at a sink. I'd debated selling my blood for gas money. Now someone was offering me enough to change everything. This is insane, I said. I was applying for minimum wage jobs this morning. Catherine's voice softened, not kind, but precise. Alexander Laurent employs tens of thousands of people. He funds hospitals, schools, entire communities. He's been searching for a compatible donor for 3 years. You're not just blood to him, you're hope. Something didn't add up. If he's been searching for years, I asked, why the urgency now? He had an incident yesterday, she replied. Internal bleeding. He needs emergency surgery. Without compatible blood, the surgery will end him. Dr. Harrison shifted beside me. There's something else. Catherine held up a hand. Tell her. She deserves to know before she decides. He pulled up a complex chart on his tablet, lines and markers that meant nothing to me. When we identified your Rh null status, we ran a comprehensive genetic panel, he said. Standard protocol. But we found additional markers. He hesitated. Did your mother ever mention anything unusual about your birth? My mother died when I was 2, I said. Car accident. And your father? Alive, I replied. Kansas. Retired. Why? Catherine leaned forward. Miss Hartley, the genetic markers match a very specific lineage. The Laurent family has been searching for blood relatives for decades. My heart began to pound. Alexander Laurent had a younger brother, she continued. He disappeared in 1973, came to America, changed his name. The room tilted. Your father, she said gently, was born Philippe Laurent. I shook my head. That's impossible. She slid a photograph across the table. 2 young men stood beside a yacht, champagne glasses raised. One was clearly Alexander. The other, my breath caught. It was my father, younger, sharper, wearing clothes I'd never seen him afford. Call him, Dr. Harrison said softly. Ask him yourself. My hands shook as I dialed the number I'd known my whole life. Jess, my father answered. Everything okay? Dad, I said, my voice breaking. I need the truth. Is your real name Philippe Laurent? Silence. Long. Heavy. Then, in a voice older and sadder than I'd ever heard, and carrying an accent I'd never known to listen for, he said, How did you find out? Something inside me collapsed. My father wasn't who I thought he was, and the man I was being asked to save wasn't a stranger. He was family. The word family hung in the air like it had weight. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, as if physical pressure could anchor me to reality. Dad, I said slowly, I'm sitting in a plasma center. They say my blood can save a man in Monaco. His name is Alexander Laurent. I heard his breath hitch. Alexander, he repeated, the name breaking apart in his mouth. Henri is dying. The way he said it, soft, intimate, told me everything I needed to know. He's your brother, I said. My older brother, he confirmed. And I left him 40 years ago. My chest tightened. Why didn't you ever tell me? There was a long pause, filled only by the low hum of the machine still drawing blood from my arm. Because I chose to be William Hartley, he said finally. I chose America. I chose your mother. I chose a life I could build with my own hands instead of one that was handed to me. He exhaled slowly. Philippe Laurent died in 1973. I buried him the day I got on a plane with a fake passport and $20,000. My mind raced backward, connecting pieces I'd never known were missing. His refusal to talk about childhood, the absence of old photos, the way he sometimes muttered in his sleep, sounds I'd dismissed as nonsense, now echoing like French. "They're offering $2 million, I said quietly. "For my blood." He laughed, not bitterly, not mockingly, warmly. "Alexander always loved grand gestures," he said. "When we were young, he once bought every rose in Marseille because a woman mentioned she liked them." "Dad," I said, "I need the truth. All of it." "You'll have it," he replied, "after you save my brother." I closed my eyes. "Should I go?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "You go. You take their money, you save Alexander, and you tell him something for me." I swallowed. "What?" "Tell him Philippe forgave him a long time ago," he said. "Tell him the fight was never about money. It was about freedom. And tell him I never stopped loving him." When the call ended, my hands were trembling. Catherine watched me carefully. "You'll go," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied, "but I want to understand everything." "You will," she said, already making calls. "The car will be here in 5 minutes." Rebecca returned and carefully removed the needle, bandaging my arm with reverence, like she was handling something sacred. "You're about to save a life," she whispered. "Maybe more than one." The ride to the executive airport felt unreal. I sat inside a Bentley I'd only ever seen in magazines, watching the city blur past the window. Catherine spoke rapid French into her phone. I caught my father's real name more than once, each time sounding stranger, heavier. The jet was already running when we arrived. Sleek, white, impossibly quiet. Inside, it felt less like a plane and more like a luxury hotel. Cream leather seats, polished wood, a private medical team preparing equipment with calm precision. As we lifted off, Dr. Chen, Alexander's physician, explained the procedure. "Your blood makes the surgery possible," she said. "Without it, we can't proceed." I stared out the window as the ground disappeared beneath us. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been counting ramen packets in my brother's basement. Now I was flying across the world because of something hidden inside me my entire life. For the first time since everything collapsed, I didn't feel powerless. I felt chosen, not by fate, by blood. Monaco looked unreal from the air. Golden water, white buildings pressed against the cliffs like they belonged there by right. The hospital was nothing like the ones I knew. Marble floors, quiet hallways, windows facing the sea. It felt less like a place people came to survive and more like a place designed to forget fear existed at all. I didn't forget. When they wheeled me into the private wing, my legs shook beneath the blanket. I told myself it was the flight, the adrenaline, the sheer shock of the last 24 hours. But when I finally saw Alexander Laurent, I knew it was something else. He was smaller than I imagined, pale, fragile. Yet his eyes, sharp, warm, unmistakably familiar, locked onto mine with immediate recognition. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he said in lightly accented English. Philippe's eyes. Hearing my father's true name spoken aloud like that sent a strange ache through my chest. The transfusion took hours. Machines hummed softly. Nurses moved with practiced calm. Between rests, Alexander talked. About France, about the shipping business their father had built from a single boat after the war, about the argument that split two brothers who loved each other too much to stay the same. "It was never about money," he said quietly. "It was about choice. I wanted him to choose the family. He wanted to choose himself." "Do you regret not finding him?" I asked. "Every day," he replied. "But I respected his freedom, even when it cost me." The surgery happened the next morning. My blood, something I'd nearly sold for $50, made it possible. I waited in a quiet room overlooking the harbor, hands clasped so tightly my fingers hurt. Hours passed. Then a doctor came in and smiled. "He's stable," she said. The surgery was a success. Relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. Color returned to Alexander's face over the following days. His laughter filled the room again. He joked with his children and grandchildren, my cousins, a word that still felt strange on my tongue. $2 million appeared in my account exactly as promised. But that wasn't the moment everything truly shifted. That came the night Alexander's daughter, Marie, asked me to dinner by the harbor. The lights reflected on the water like scattered coins. "You didn't fail," she said after listening to my story. "You lost a fight with red tape and bad records. That's not the same thing." "I lost my company," I replied. "You built it once," she said calmly. "That means you can build again." She told me about Laurent Development Group's expansion into the United States, about their need for someone who understood demolition and rebuilding, someone they could trust. "Family," she added, smiling. And in that smile, I saw my father. When I flew back to America 3 days later, I wasn't the same woman who had walked into a plasma center, hungry and ashamed. My first stop was Kansas. My father was waiting in his small duplex, coffee brewing in the same battered pot. 2 mugs sat on the table where he'd once helped me with homework. He looked the same, but I saw him differently now. Not just as William Hartley, but as Philippe Laurent, the man who walked away from a fortune to build an honest life. "Is he all right?" he asked quietly. "He will be," I said. "He wants you to know there's no anger, only love." My father closed his eyes. "I am home," he said softly. "I've been home since the day your mother poured me coffee at a diner and asked why I looked so sad." We talked for hours about France, about my mother, about the life he chose and the one he left behind. There were regrets, but no shame. That night, I called Tyler. "You don't have to worry about tuition or rent anymore," I told him. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, alarmed. "I'll tell you everything soon," I said. "But remember this, sometimes losing everything is how you find out what you're really worth." The next morning, I called Jonathan. "I'm not calling to fix anything," I said calmly when he answered. "I'm calling to thank you." "For what?" he snapped. "For leaving," I replied. "If you hadn't, I never would have walked into that plasma center." "Goodbye, Jonathan." I hung up before he could respond. A month later, I was back in business. Hartley International Demolition, now partnered with Laurent Development Group. My first project was $40 million. I rehired 6 of my old crew, the ones who'd stood by me when I couldn't pay them. Jonathan faded into the background of my life, exactly where he belonged. I didn't take revenge. I didn't need to. The truth did that on its own. 6 months later, I sat alone in my new office just after sunrise. It wasn't flashy. No marble floors, no glass walls meant to impress. Just a solid desk, clean lines, sunlight cutting across blueprints spread neatly in front of me. The kind of room built for work, not performance. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Hartley International Demolition was alive again. Not the same company, not the same scale, but stronger where it mattered. I hired people who remembered what loyalty looked like. I paid my crews on time. I double-checked everything myself. Experience has a way of sharpening your instincts when arrogance is burned out of you. My father visited often now. Sometimes he was William, sometimes, quietly, Philippe. He helped me review applications for a training program I'd started, giving people from rough backgrounds a chance to learn a trade, a skill, a way back up. "Second chances," he said once, pride softening his voice. "Third," I corrected gently. "Sometimes fourth." Tyler came home for spring break, taller, more confident, still my son. We walked through a site together, hard hats on, and he watched my crews move with practiced coordination. "You okay, Mom?" he asked casually, like he used to. I smiled. "I am." And I meant it. Jonathan never reached out again. Not after the call. Not after the news filtered through social circles he still cared about. I heard things. Regret, confusion, anger. But they no longer belonged to me. When someone shows you who they are at your lowest, believe them. I learned that strength isn't in never falling. It's in discovering that even when everything is stripped away, money, reputation, marriage, something essential remains. something no one can take from you. I thought I was worth what I built. Then I lost it all, and I learned I was worth what I could give, what could save someone else, what had been running quietly through me all along, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Sometimes life doesn't break you to punish you. Sometimes it breaks you open. My name is Jessica Hartley, daughter of a man who chose freedom over inheritance, mother to a son who will choose his own path, and a woman who learned that being called a failure can be the first step toward understanding what winning really means. Not because of money, not because of power, but because of truth. Because when everything falls away, what's left is who you really are. And that's enough.